The crystal wine glass shattered against the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo through eternity. But that wasn't what made the entire dining room fall silent. It was the gasp that followed, 20 elite guests watching in horror as Victoria Blackwood, draped in diamonds and decades of privilege, grabbed Elena by the shoulders and tore her uniform right down the front, the fabric ripping like thunder in the suffocating silence. For a moment that stretched like a lifetime, Elena stood frozen. Her dark hands trembled as she clutched the torn fabric to her chest, her dignity shredded along with the cotton. The grand chandelier above seemed to dim, its 1,000 crystals reflecting not light, but shame. And then, like a lion rising to defend the innocent, Daniel Blackwood pushed back his chair and stood, his eyes blazing with a fury that made the entire room hold its breath. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe, give this video a like, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from. Now let's begin. Elena Rodriguez was 26 years old, with eyes that held the wisdom of someone who had learned too young that life was not fair. She had been working in a Blackwood mansion for 2 years, moving through its halls like a ghost, present but invisible, essential but unacknowledged. Her mother had cleaned houses before her, and her grandmother before that. It was honest work, she told herself, even when the weight of invisible chains pressed down on her shoulders. She had gentle hands that never broke anything, a soft voice that never raised in anger, and a spirit that somehow remained unbroken despite the daily cruelties that came with serving the wealthy. Every morning, she braided her long black hair into a neat bun, pressed her uniform until it was spotless, and entered the mansion through the servant's entrance, leaving her dreams at the door. But dreams, Elena had learned, have a way of refusing to stay buried. Daniel Blackwood was 32, heir to a fortune built on steel and ambition, but he possessed something his money couldn't buy, a heart that recognized worth beyond wealth. From the moment Elena began working in his family's home, something stirred in him that he couldn't name. It wasn't just her beauty, though her dark eyes held depths that made him forget himself. It was her grace under pressure, the way she absorbed insults like a sponge absorbs water, never letting the poison seep through to her core. He watched her serve ungrateful guests who treated her like furniture, saw her comfort other staff members when they cried, witnessed her dignity shine through every small humiliation. And slowly, dangerously, he began to fall in love with a woman his world would never accept. Victoria Blackwood had built her empire on 3 pillars: money, status, and control. She was a woman who had learned early that emotions were weaknesses and that maintaining appearances was everything. Her marriage had been strategic, her friendships calculated, and her motherhood performed with the precision of a military operation. She ruled her household with an iron fist wrapped in silk gloves, and every servant knew their place in her perfectly ordered world. But Elena threatened that order in ways Victoria couldn't articulate. It started with small things, the way Daniel's voice softened when he spoke to the young maid, how his eyes followed her movements across a room, the way he thanked her for tasks that required no gratitude. Victoria watched her son watching Elena, and something cold and terrible began to grow in her chest. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon when Victoria's closest friend, Catherine Whitmore, came for tea. As Elena served delicate pastries on china, so thin it was translucent, Catherine's eyes narrowed with the predatory instinct of a woman who thrived on gossip. "She's quite lovely for someone in service," Catherine observed, her voice carrying that particular tone wealthy women used when discussing people they consider beneath them. Victoria's hand tightened on her teacup. "Lovely? She's ordinary. Nothing more than help, and she'll never be anything else in this house." Elena heard every word, though she pretended the voices were just background noise. She had learned long ago to make herself smaller when the women spoke, to become invisible while remaining present. But the words still cut, each one a small blade pressed against her heart. That evening, Daniel found Elena in the corridor outside the library. She was carrying fresh towels, her movements efficient and quiet as always. "Elena," he said softly, and she stopped, turning to face him with downcast eyes. "Yes, sir. You don't have to endure her words," he said, stepping closer. "You're worth more than the way she treats you." Elena's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like that, as if she were a person whose feelings mattered. "It's my word, sir. Words are just words." But Daniel saw the pain she tried to hide, the way her shoulders carried the weight of 1,000 small cruelties. "One day," he said quietly, "I'll make sure the whole world knows your worth." Elena looked up at him then, and for a moment, their eyes met with an intensity that made the air between them shimmer. Then she remembered herself, remembered her place, and lowered her gaze. "Someone might hear, sir." But someone had already heard. Victoria stood in the shadows at the end of the corridor, watching her son's face transform as he spoke to the maid. Watching Elena's careful composure crack just enough to reveal the woman beneath the uniform. And in that moment, Victoria Blackwood declared war on a girl whose only crime was existing in a space where she wasn't wanted. The annual charity gala was approaching, Victoria's crown jewel event where the city's elite gathered to donate money and congratulate themselves on their generosity. The guest list read like a who's who of power and privilege. Senators, judges, business moguls, and socialites whose combined wealth could fund small countries. Victoria planned every detail with military precision, from the orchid arrangements to the 7-course menu prepared by the city's most exclusive caterer. For Elena, it meant 2 weeks of 18-hour days, polishing silver until it gleamed, arranging flowers until her fingers bled from thorns, and enduring Victoria's increasingly sharp commands. The other staff, Clara, the head housekeeper, Thomas, the elderly butler, and Maria, the cook, watched Elena with growing concern. "She's planning something," Clara whispered one evening as they folded napkins in the servants' hall. "I've worked for the Blackwoods for 15 years, and I've never seen Mrs. Victoria this focused." Elena's hands never paused in their work. "We'll do our jobs, and everything will be fine." But even as she said the words, Elena felt the storm building around her. The night before the gala, Victoria summoned Elena to the drawing room. The older woman sat perfectly composed in her favorite chair, her jewelry catching the lamplight like ice. Her voice was calm, almost conversational, which somehow made her words more terrifying. "You're a pretty girl, Elena," Victoria began, and Elena's blood turned to ice water. "Pretty enough to turn heads, to make people forget themselves. But beauty without breeding is just decoration. Temporary decoration." Elena kept her eyes fixed on the Persian rug beneath her feet. "Yes, ma'am. You see, my dear, some people might mistake my son's kindness for something more. They might get ideas above their station." Victoria's voice never rose, never sharpened, but each word was a scalpel. "I would hate for anyone to embarrass themselves by misunderstanding their place in this household." "I understand my place, ma'am." "Do you?" Victoria stood and walked to the fireplace, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a countdown. "Because tomorrow night, the most important people in this city will be watching. And if anyone were to forget themselves, well, I would have to remind them. Publicly." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but her voice remained steady. "I'll do my work, ma'am. Nothing more." Victoria smiled then, a cold expression that never reached her eyes. "Of course you will." The night of the gala arrived with all the pageantry Victoria had orchestrated. The Blackwood mansion blazed with light, every window glowing like a beacon. Luxury cars formed a parade down the tree-lined drive, depositing guests in designer gowns and custom tuxedos. Inside, the house hummed with activity as staff members moved through their choreographed duties. Elena wore her finest uniform, pressed until every seam was sharp, her hair arranged in a neat bun that had become her signature. She carried trays with the grace of a dancer, served wine with the precision of a surgeon, and spoke only when spoken to. Everything was perfect, controlled, exactly as Victoria demanded. The guests were magnificent in their wealth, women dripping in jewels worth more than most people's homes, men whose casual conversations moved stock markets. They filled the dining room like peacocks, their laughter bright and sharp as crystal. At the head of the table sat Victoria, resplendent in sapphires that matched her ice-blue gown, holding court over her kingdom of privilege. Daniel sat to her right, handsome in his tailored tuxedo, but Elena noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes followed her movements with protective vigilance. He tried to talk to his mother again that morning. Elena knew, because she had heard raised voices from behind closed doors. Whatever he had said had not changed Victoria's mind. The first courses passed without incident. Elena served soup, cleared plates, poured wine, all while remaining invisible. She had perfected the art of being present but unnoticed, a skill that had kept her safe in hostile environments before. But safety, she was beginning to understand, was an illusion when you were caught between a mother's fury and a son's forbidden affection. It happened during the main course, just as the conversation had turned to the evening's charitable purpose, funding a new wing at the children's hospital. Elena approached Victoria's end of the table, carrying a silver serving dish filled with expertly prepared duck. Her steps were measured, her grip steady, her face a mask of professional composure. "Stop!" Victoria's voice cut through the dinner conversation like a knife through silk. Every head turned, every fork paused midway to mouths. "Come here, girl." Elena's heart clenched, but she obeyed, stepping closer to Victoria's chair. The older woman's eyes glittered with something that made Elena's skin crawl. "3 years you've worked in my house," Victoria announced, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. 3 years, and you still haven't learned to carry yourself properly. Elena's throat constricted. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You walk through my home like you belong here," Victoria continued, her voice rising with each word. "Like you're more than what you are. Do you think because my son is polite to you that you're special?" The room was dead silent now. 20 pairs of eyes watched the scene unfold with the horrified fascination of witnesses to a car accident. Elena's hands began to shake, but she managed to whisper, "No, ma'am. No." Victoria's laugh was like breaking glass. "Then perhaps you need a reminder of exactly what you are." Victoria's hand shot out like a striking snake, grabbing the front of Elena's uniform. The sound of tearing fabric filled the silence like a scream. Elena stumbled backward, the serving dish clattering to the floor as she clutched the torn material to her chest, her face burning with shame and shock. Gasps rippled around the table. A woman's voice whispered, "Dear God." A man cleared his throat uncomfortably. The chandelier above continued to sparkle, indifferent to the cruelty unfolding beneath its light. Elena stood frozen, exposed and humiliated, tears she had sworn never to shed in this house threatening to fall. Every fiber of her being wanted to run, to disappear, to never again face the pitying stares and horrified whispers. But her legs wouldn't move, wouldn't carry her away from this moment that would define the rest of her life. And then Daniel rose. The sound of his chair scraping against marble echoed like thunder. His face was pale, his eyes blazing with a fury that made several guests lean back in their seats. Without a word, he shrugged out of his tuxedo jacket and stepped toward Elena, draping it gently around her shoulders. His hands lingered on her arms, steadying her trembling form. And when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man who had finally found his backbone. "Mother." The single word contained volumes of disappointment, anger, and finality. That was unforgivable. Victoria's face went white, then red, as if she couldn't decide whether to be embarrassed or enraged. "Daniel, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." He turned to face the room, his arms still protectively around Elena's shoulders. "You humiliated an innocent woman in front of all these people, not because she did anything wrong, but because you wanted to hurt her. You wanted to remind her of her place, but the only thing you've reminded us of is yours." The silence was deafening. Catherine Whitmore's mouth hung open like a fish. Senator Morrison studied his wine glass as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Judge Patterson coughed uncomfortably. "You would defend her over your own mother?" Victoria's voice cracked with disbelief. "I'm defending what's right," Daniel replied firmly. I'm defending human dignity, which should matter more than bloodlines or bank accounts. And if that means choosing between right and wrong, between kindness and cruelty, then yes, I choose her." The words hung in the air like a bell that couldn't be unrung. Elena felt tears finally spill over, but they weren't tears of shame anymore. They were tears of something she had never dared hope for. Someone seeing her worth, someone willing to risk everything to defend it. Victoria's carefully constructed world cracked like ice in spring. Her son, her heir, the person she had shaped and molded to carry on the family legacy, had publicly chosen a servant over her. The guests she had invited to witness her power had instead witnessed her cruelty exposed under the harsh light of truth. "How dare you?" she whispered, but the words had no power now. Daniel's voice was steady, final. "How dare I what? Treat another human being with respect? Show kindness to someone who has shown nothing but loyalty to this family? Love someone for who she is rather than what she represents?" The word love fell into the silence like a stone into still water, creating ripples that would spread far beyond this room, this night, this moment. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she realized what he had just admitted, what it would cost him, what it meant for both of them. "Elena," Daniel said softly, turning to look at her with eyes that held no shame, no regret, only truth. "I love you, not because you're perfect, but because your heart is. Not because the world says I should, but because I can't imagine a world where I don't." Elena couldn't speak. Her voice was trapped somewhere between her heart and her throat, tangled up with years of believing she wasn't worth loving, wasn't worth defending, wasn't worth choosing. But here was this man, this wealthy, privileged man who could have anyone, choosing her in front of everyone who mattered in their world. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Victoria excused herself from the table, her exit as dramatic as her entrance had been cruel. Guests began making their polite departures, their conversations already shifting to how they would tell this story at tomorrow's luncheons and charity meetings. The gala that was meant to showcase Victoria's power had become the night her reign cracked beyond repair. In the weeks that followed, the story spread through their social circles like wildfire. Some called Daniel a fool for throwing away his inheritance for a servant. Others quietly admired his courage, whispering behind closed doors about true love conquering social barriers. A few brave souls even reached out to express their support, though most did so carefully, aware that Victoria Blackwood's influence still reached far and wide. But Daniel didn't care about the whispers or the consequences. He had found something worth more than his mother's approval or society's acceptance. He had found love that didn't require him to compromise his values or sacrifice his integrity. Elena struggled with the sudden attention, the way people stared at her on the street, the mix of sympathy and curiosity in their eyes. But gradually, she began to understand what Daniel had given her that night. Not just his protection, but his recognition of her worth. For the first time in her life, someone powerful had looked at her and seen not a servant, but a woman deserving of respect, dignity, and love. Victoria, meanwhile, found herself increasingly isolated in her grand mansion. The staff, once cowed by her authority, began to treat her with polite but distant professionalism. Her friends, sensing a shift in power, became less available for luncheons and less interested in her opinions. The empire she had built on fear and control began to crumble without her son's support. 6 months after the gala, Daniel made his choice official. He moved out of the family mansion and into a modest but comfortable home across town. Elena moved in with him, not as his servant, but as his partner, his equal, his beloved. They married in a small ceremony attended by the staff members who had become their chosen family, and the few friends brave enough to stand with them. Victoria was not invited. The wedding was everything the gala was not: intimate, genuine, filled with love rather than pretense. Elena wore a simple white dress that made her look like an angel, and Daniel wore a smile that outshone any diamond. When they exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other regardless of what the world might say, there wasn't a dry eye in the small chapel. Thomas, the elderly butler, walked Elena down the aisle, tears streaming down his weathered face. Clara caught the bouquet and cried with joy. Maria, the cook, prepared a feast that rivaled any catered event, every dish made with love rather than obligation. And somewhere across town, in a mansion that felt too big and too quiet, Victoria Blackwood sat alone with her pearls and her pride, finally understanding what she had lost in her desperate attempt to maintain control. She had sacrificed her son's happiness, her own peace, and any chance of redemption, all to preserve a social order that ultimately meant nothing without love to sustain it. Years later, when people told the story of the night the Blackwood dynasty fell, they spoke of different things. Some remembered the shocking moment when a society matron publicly humiliated her servant. Others recalled the courage of a young man who chose love over legacy. But those who knew the full story understood that it was really about justice, the kind that doesn't come from courts or laws, but from the simple recognition that every human being deserves dignity, respect, and the chance to be loved for who they truly are. Elena and Daniel built a life filled with purpose and joy. They started a foundation to help domestic workers pursue education and better opportunities. They opened their home to those who needed shelter and support. They proved that love could indeed conquer the barriers of class and prejudice, but only when backed by the courage to stand up for what's right. And in the end, justice was served not through revenge or retaliation, but through the simple act of choosing love over hatred, humanity over hierarchy, and truth over tradition. The woman who had tried to tear down an innocent person found herself torn down by her own cruelty, while the love she had tried to destroy only grew stronger in the face of adversity. The sound of breaking glass had echoed through the Blackwood mansion that night, but it wasn't just crystal that shattered. It was the brittle facade of a world built on cruelty and maintained through fear. And from those broken pieces, something beautiful and true emerged. A love story that reminded everyone who heard it that worth isn't measured by wealth. Dignity isn't determined by birth, and justice, real justice, comes to those who have the courage to stand up for love. If this story moved your heart the way it moved mine, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that love conquers all, and that standing up for what's right is always worth the cost. Thank you for reading, and remember, your worth isn't determined by others' opinions, but by the love you give and the courage you show. We'll see you in the next story. See you in the next video.